welcome to PhD with Woman on It, Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hacks delivered will be by our guest, Denise Conroy. Topic: Building Financial Independence Through Financial Literacy. Episode 113 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring hard to that hustle because empathy is my motto, and empathy is critical when you're building financial independence through financial literacy. Let me mention a couple of important things that's been happening in the technology world. Congratulations to Chris Kashtanova on joining Adobe as their senior creative evangelist, artificial intelligence. We can't wait to see all the amazing things he will achieve in this new role. Exciting news: Standard Chartered and DIFC Innovation Hub team up to empower more UAE women entrepreneurs through the 5th cohort of Women in Technology Accelerator program. May this inspire and encourage more women to foster diversity and innovation in technology. Congratulations to Certified Global Mobility Specialist Ambassador Sandeepa for completing her bachelor degree of law, LLB, at University of Mumbai last week. We are proud of you. And finally, great words of applause and always supporting great Cindy Gallop, who recommended our today's guest to our lovely audience. So let's go into the topic of today. Denise, where in the world are you today?
I am in the Berkshire Mountains in Western Massachusetts in the US, and I am at this wonderful retreat spa called Miraval. I know a lot of people have probably been to the one that's out in Arizona. That's the older one, but as an entrepreneur, this is my first vacation in 2 years. So super excited. Also want to throw a quick thank you out to Cindy Gallop. Cindy Gallop, the first time I saw her speak, I was a member of Chief, and she just blew my mind. I mean, completely blew my mind. I'd never seen anyone quite like her, and I haven't since. So just want to say how much respect I have for her.
Absolutely, she's a great role model, not only in technology, in sex tech, sexual education, as well as many different avenues, including the great word for all the female entrepreneurs, bootstrapping. So let's go into today's topic. Women are consistently shortchanged in the housing market, for example. According to 2022 study from Yale University, the study found that single women buy houses for 2% more than single men on average, but they also sell those houses for 2% less. So that's one of the data. We're going to discuss more data about financial literacy, the art of negotiation, the art of saving the money. But let's go to the main topic. I would like you to discuss the fact that females not necessarily are capable of reading numbers. Denise, what's your take on that? What's your experience?
Well, I'd say first off, that's preposterous. I mean, we have women who are Nobel laureates. We have, all these women who prove that I think the female brain is no different than the male brain. It's a brain. And I think it's just a matter of exposure. So sometimes depending on our past that we've taken, our journeys and our careers, we don't get the exposure to specifically financial statements. When I talk financial statements, I'm really only talking about the 3 major statements, which are an income statement, a balance sheet, and a cash flow statement. And what I really work with a lot of my clients on, especially the ones like me who came up in support functions like marketing, human resources, tech, right? Those people are very, very skilled in their domain, in their function, but they've never necessarily had to pay attention to the financials. And I can tell you, if you're somebody who aspires to climb the ladder, to perhaps go out and start your own business, you've got to understand how to read financials. And I always say this to people because a lot of us who didn't grow up reading them or who didn't come up in our career don't like math. We're math averse, right? I know I was. And I was like, oh, I'll just avoid that because it's math and I avoid everything that is math. But I will tell you that it is basic, I promise, elementary school math. So if I can master financials, anybody can master financials.
So how did you come across this elementary school basic? What made you decide to nail it down and see what's behind that, hoxy poxy?
Yeah, exactly. Great question. So I was working at a television network. I had just landed my first vice president role and vice president of marketing. And I had a boss. I was reporting to the COO who said to me, I know you're really ambitious. I know that you're probably going to want to be a CEO someday. I think he could see me better than I saw myself at that point. And he's like, if you want to do that, you're going to have to learn how to read financial statements. And he's like, we'll pay for it. So go find a program that'll teach you how to do it. You need to learn how to read financial statements. And one of the things he said to me is, Denise, you're very outspoken. And when you're in our senior leadership meetings, and I was the only woman on the leadership team, right? And by far the youngest. And he said, you get really quiet when we talk about the financials. So everybody knows that you are not comfortable in the financials. And some people downgrade you for that. So I was fortunate. I went to Stanford, long immersion course at Stanford. It was called Understanding Financials for the Non-Financial Manager. And it was just a game changer for me. It was grounded in case method, got to learn about a lot of different companies and types of financials and just what do different industries look like. What are some of the variables you can look at? So total game changer.
So game changer, however, the official or more conventional route is not always, advised. I mean, there are many resources online, including YouTube, where we are at the moment. Hopefully, we'll get some questions from our lovely audience. Facebook, LinkedIn, Auntie Wiki and Uncle Google will give you the answers. So let's go down to the first bit, income statement. What's important about that part?
What's important about the income statement, and this is why when everybody, first I'll say, everyone who reads financial statements, you develop your own rhythm. So some people might start with the balance sheet. Some people start somewhere else. I like to start at the top, which is the income statement. That's where the revenue is detailed, right? How much is this company making and how is it making its money? What are the direct expenses, meaning the expenses that without them, you couldn't make the product or service. And then what is what we would call overhead, those indirect expenses. So I really, really love starting with that income statement and understanding how's the cash inflow, right? How does cash come into an organization?
Excellent. Cash inflow. Speaking of cash inflow, I just heard that Mattel is doing a lot of money around Christmas, but not so much throughout the year. Now it has changed since they are promoting their latest Barbie movie. So let's imagine there is one female sitting at the Mattel board and she's wondering, okay, I've got income statement. I know that there is a problem. It's not consistent. And how do I advise or how do we make it stick? Is there something we can make a suggestion, or what would you like to say to these female who are not sure how to be outspoken during the board meetings, but want to look the part and be part of the financial discussion?
Yeah, gosh, that is such a great question. You are, when you're looking to move up, the way you do it, at least from my experience, is you identify gaps or opportunities. So as you talked about in your Mattel example, right, so much of Mattel's revenue is weighted seasonally, right? Most of it's going to hit at Christmas time. But here's the rub. Not all Christmases are created equal. So there is an incredible amount of risk. I actually ran a seasonal business before. Incredible amount of risk if for some reason Christmas stinks, let's say your supply chain gets all hamstrung and you miss your numbers for Christmas, that means you've probably missed your numbers for the rest of the year. A huge amount of risk. So what you're looking to do with that financial information is, number one, you want to mitigate risk. The way to mitigate risk in a seasonal business is to come up with ideas to make money at other times of the year, right? You hedge your bets. You say, okay, if we miss a little on Christmas, it's not so bad because we've got these other things happening, the Barbie movie, the franchise, all the licensing around that. So that is the sort of opportunity identification that reading that income statement can do for you. I actually teach a course on this. I teach two. One is called Understanding Financial Statements for the Non-Financial Executive. It's 4 hours over Zoom. It's $300. It's cheap. It's meant to be cheap because I want more women to take it. Then I have a follow-up called Dig Deeper, Business Analysis. And that's really meant to take what we learn in the first class and teach people how to make a business case. So again, you're just looking for opportunities and gaps. The people who can identify those are the people who move up.
People who identify, people who are interested, and people who are curious and are capable of asking questions, no matter how small. So let's go to the next one, balance sheet. I'm sorry to jump all over the place, Denise. I hope we can discuss the balance sheet, what we should focus on the balance sheet.
So on the balance sheet, that just takes us sort of, it's almost like an onion, takes us one step deeper. And we can start to look, there are three major sections. We can start to look at those three sections and understand more context within the business, right? To really uncover, when we start to get into parts of profitability, we start to get into some of the, okay, we made this much money from the income statement, and here's how it's flowing, because it's very connected to the balance sheet, right? Here's how it flows into that balance sheet. So again, it's just the next layer of the onion, diving down into the business to really get into all of the parts and pieces, the total capital structure of a business, not just what you bring in any given year, that operating money, right? But also about your assets, some of the other, taxes, interest, things like that. So that next peel of the onion, if you will.
And the third peel?
Third peel is our cash flow statement, which is really wild. Until I became a CEO, I never cared about the cash flow statement, which was such a position of privilege. I never had to. And then you become the CEO and you're like, oh crap, I gotta make payroll, right? And if you're in a business where things are tight, you really have to watch that cash statement like a hawk, which I always did. So your cash position is dictated not only by the operating income, although that's a huge piece of it. There's investment income. Companies invest just like people do, right? Usually they invest in shorter term instruments, bonds, things like that. But then there's also, if you are, let's say, a company that issues equity, certainly if you're a public company, right? If you pull any public company's financials, you're going to see a section on the cash flow statement that shows how much equity, folks have in the company, and those activities, shareholder activities, if you will. So, cash, people think of cash only as actual hard currency, but it's actually same as currency and sort of asset value of a total enterprise as well. And what I like to say to people is, the question I always get is, how much cash should you have on hand for a business? You should have at least 6 months of operating expenses. That'd be those direct expenses that we talked about from the income statement, as well as the indirect expenses. And so a really good litmus test, if you're, let's say, an investor, even yourself, if you want to see if a company's in a healthy cash position, go and calculate 6 months of operating expenses and see if the company has at least that in their cash.
Well, I am hoping that everybody follows this lively discussion. We've got Olga Vasina is asking questions and making comments. Fabulous topic, Beata. Welcome, Denise. Now she's asking, what are the 5 things that are key to understand on a balance sheet? I hope we can add something. She's pointing out 3 to 5. Let's go.
3 to 5 things to look for on a balance sheet. First and foremost, you want to take a look at, what that, I like to look at the tax. So I look at how much tax a company is paying. I like to look at interest. I like to look at, a whole variety of things that have to do less with tangible stuff that we think about, not that tax and interest aren't, but things that make a company's capital structure different, interesting, unique, or maybe very uninteresting. So I look at the balance sheet. I don't know if it's 3 to 5 specific things, but I like to look at that balance sheet and figure out risk, right? Is there anything that is interesting, unusual, maybe kind of a little bit scary, right? Or a little bit risky about a company, how it's set up, how much debt is it carrying? Those are the things that I definitely like to look at.
And what about debt of unpaying clients? How to tackle that?
Yeah, you just brought up a really good point. I love to look at accounts payable and accounts receivable. And a really good example of this, right? How capable is a company of paying its bills, but also how capable is a company of getting its bills paid, right? Because there is absolutely a lot of discipline, a lot of rigor to that, and a healthy business knows how to do both. So a great example is, and I know Elon Musk is very much in the news right now for so many things. But when you look at Twitter, and in the course that I teach, we actually look at Twitter. One of the things that you will see is that Twitter has never been terrific at paying their bills. Elon Musk has never been terrific at Tesla in paying his bills. He's had moments of being more within norms, but him stopping paying his bills is not unusual. That for me as an investor is a flag. It would be a flag for me also as an employee, because I don't love the ethics of someone who plays games with their vendors and doesn't pay their bills.
And since we are talking about this topic, what about the value of money over time?
Value of money over time, and that's a great question for right now. So, the value of money over time, I think where you have to start there is how much did it cost you to acquire the money that you need, right? So right now we're in such an inflationary environment. Money's expensive, and we're coming off of a period where money was really cheap. So, the industry that I came from, I worked for private equity backed companies, and there were so many private equity deals done in the last 2 years prior to this position or this season kind of that we're in now, that there was a flurry of deal making happening. And you saw this in venture capital as well. And now you're seeing a ton of dry powder, largely because folks are saying, well, I can't find the money cheaply enough to fund this. And one of the things to know about private equity, and this applies to venture cap as well to an extent, is that a lot of these companies, PE firms, like to go out and they don't pay for companies that they buy from their own coffers. They will go out and they will load a company up with debt based on the company's health, its financial performance, but they will load the company up with 70%, 80%, 85% debt from a lender. And in order for them to weigh and balance the risk of doing that, they have to think that interest rate that they're going to pay over the term for the money they've borrowed from the lender is going to more than be paid off, right, from the value of that investment. So right now, you're seeing folks just sit on the sidelines because they're not sure. These interest rates are really high, and they're not sure that any of these businesses are going to bring back that return. So I think that's the most important thing to know about money. You have to start with how much did it cost me to acquire money, because most times folks are borrowing it. And then whatever that term is that I'm going to hold on to an investment, do I think I can more than pay for the cost of the initial investment, including the interest rate that I had to borrow at?
All right, we've got another question from Olga. It's very dynamic discussion today, Denise. I'm so delighted to have you. How do things differ when you are analyzing company financials from a business perspective, as opposed to from the perspective of a common stock or bond investor?
Yeah, it's a good
That's
question.
a tricky one.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the principles apply. The difference being if you're not in a business, right, and you're just an investor, you're a shareholder, a stockholder, you have no ability to influence how that company runs. So you just have to pay attention as an investor and say, either you like what they're doing and you believe in it so much that you're going to put your money behind it, or you don't and you yank your money and you go for something else that you believe in more. It's why you'll hear Warren Buffett and folks like him say, I only invest in things you know something about, right? Something you're passionate about, something you know something about. So if you're really into fitness, and let's say you know fitness inside and out, apparel, devices, all of it, that might be your sweet spot for investing because you've got a really good knowledge of it. You lose a lot of control as an investor when you're actually in a business. You theoretically, especially if you're an executive, you control one of the levers to make revenue and hopefully profit. So let's say, I'm the head of HR, I'm a chief human resources officer. Think about it. I have control over people, processes for bringing the best people, retaining them, right, in an organization and really developing and leveraging them and growing them. So that's something that's a massive input, and I can control the outcome of the investment. Person who's just investing on E-Trade can't.
That's more advanced answer. I guess if anybody wants to join Denise's course, we will be posting things online. However, now you've got a chance to ask her directly. We've got another question. I POV'd in Patrick's opinion. Hello, Patrick. Great discussion, he says. You mentioned seasonality. Very valid. How do you approach cyclical issues?
I think there's a dual approach here. I think you've got to be innovating and always looking for, we'll go back to the Mattel example that we talked about earlier. You've always got to be looking for those off-season opportunities, whether it's through acquisition, through leveraging assets that you already have. One of the things people say to me, what's a CEO do? And I didn't have a good answer for it, to be frank, until I became one, and I was one for about a year or two. And what I learned is that we allocate resources, we remove roadblocks, and we place bets, right? We really do. Everything's a bet. And you really have to figure out what is the least risky way, how much risk can I live with to get a payoff that I really want, right? And you have to kind of move those. It's almost like moving the slides, when you're recording a record. It feels like that. In terms of seasonality, so the business that I ran was a seasonal business. We would go from 250 permanent employees to 10,000 seasonals in the spring. We'd go back down. We'd go back up at Christmas time. It was an event photography business. It was in all different segments. And I think the first thing that you do to control for cyclicality is you figure out what are my off seasons, and number one, are there any acquisitions I can go out and make, right, that are going to give me a little bit of stability in those valleys, right, of activity, revenue activity. I think the other thing that you got to think about from a cyclicality perspective is, do you have any sort of a lending facility, right? Do you have a credit facility? And a lot of businesses work this way, where they will go out and they might do a $5 million credit facility, could even be more. And that's how they live through those downtimes. And then they make the rest of their money through those uptimes in the peaks, right? And they're able to pay off that debt. So there's a lot of different approaches. And I think number one, it's all about, mitigating risk. It's also about when you're in a seasonal business, and I found this out the hard way. I really, really messed up. I failed in my first year as a CEO. And what I did wrong was that I did not absolutely ensure that our age-old processes and operations were tight, were flawless, and as I found out very quickly, they weren't. I added that with a website that I launched too late. We were an e-commerce business. That was a disaster. So I would say for anybody who's running an organization or a piece of an organization, you have to make damn sure when you go into that revenue producing season or seasons, but they're limited, that you know that you can execute, because that's like the bare bones minimum, right? And then the rest is the innovation and the acquisition.
So how did you cope with that problem, Denise? Did you manage to,
Yeah. Man, it was crushing. And something I would say that a lot of people don't know that being a CEO is the loneliest job in the world. It really, really is, because it's why weird people are suited to it. And I'm super weird. So one of the things that because you can't talk to anybody. You can't go to your board, for example, which is your bosses. You can't go to your board and be like, man, I'm really, really distraught. I screwed up, right? You could, but that makes them lose confidence in you potentially. So you don't want to show the whole deck of cards, right? You can't go to your people because then you're triangulating. You don't want to do that. It's inappropriate. So that's why having a coach, having somebody outside who has a neutral perspective can really help you. The way I dealt with it was, and I use this phrase all the time, I don't like to be beaten. So while I was dejected and feeling bad for a while, I went back into the business, and honestly, I did the stuff I should have done in the first place. I like to use the phrase, it's a Ronald Reagan quote, trust but verify. He used that when someone asked him, how could we trust if the Soviets were actually dismantling their nuclear arms? And he was like, well, I'm going to trust, but I'm going to verify. And I should have gone in and trusted yet verified all of our operational processes. I should have listened to the people around me who said, do not launch this e-commerce site now. Yes, we need one, but you're going to run right into this season and we haven't tested it. So I got really, really forensic about operations, which I don't really enjoy, by the way. I can do it, but it's not my favorite thing. I like finances and strategy and sort of the higher stuff. And it really paid off for me. We came back stronger than ever. We not only hit our targets in the second year, we blew them out. It was the historical most profitability, most revenue ever in the history of the company.
Well done, Denise. I hope you're going to inspire other female entrepreneurs, and not only female entrepreneurs. As we know, we have another question from our male supporter. And he says, Patrick IPO feed, you make a terrific point about people investing in what they know, understand, but isn't their passion a risk factor if they are not willing to leave their emotion to one side?
Yes. Absolutely, it's a factor. I mean, here's a great point. I think that Elon Musk buying Twitter is stupid. I think that somebody who is really, really good, and this happens a lot, right, with billionaires who happen to be men. There aren't many female billionaires. And what happens is they get, success. They become a victim of that success and think that they can run anything. Twitter's a media company. It's a digital media company. I come from that world. It's very different. Is it rocket science? No, it's not rocket science. But you have to have an intellectual humility. And Patrick brings up a really good point. I like to be clinical and almost surgical when I look at this stuff. I'm a data person, though. I started my career in market research. Analytics and data is my jam. It's how I make decisions. So for me, if the data won't bear something out, I'm not going to let my emotions override it. With Twitter, you can see that Musk is a fairly emotional guy. He's really into this investment, and it's not paying off so well for him. So it's going to be really fascinating to see what he does. A lot of people think that, by not paying his bills, he's trying to downgrade the $13 billion in debt that he has for Twitter. That's the amount of money that he borrowed. So potentially he can go in, buy it up for, let's say, 50 cents on the dollar, or probably even less than that, and then own the whole thing outright himself and, honestly save a couple $1 billion. Not terrible. So I'm with you, though. I think that it's got to be data-based, and that's why you got to understand those financials. And there are ratios that you can look at. We cover this in my courses. What are the ratios that you should be looking at different parts of financial statements, so you can judge whether a company's healthy, whether it's a risk you want to take.
Well, you touched upon a very important point, emotional buying, purchasing, and that actually proves, I think, why women fail at negotiation in terms of buying houses, and why we have to pay 2% more because we believe so much. I think that the data shows that we are desperate for that house, not the other, and we forget about the important part of negotiation. How do you tackle negotiation, Denise, since we are talking about finances?
So it's funny. I was a sports agent for a while. I'm actually really good at negotiation. I always have been. I was raised for the first 7 years of my life by my dad, and he was what you would call toxically masculine. So I think that I learned a lot of good and bad from him, but it was wild because my mother was the breadwinner. I watched her whip herself into a frenzy. Like her life was so not rational, so not sane. She had 4 kids. She was the breadwinner. She wasn't making a lot of money. She was an artist, a graphic artist. And I had the benefit of watching my dad as a man in the 70s and 80s navigate this world. And he had a lot of privilege. He had a lot of entitlement. She didn't. For better or worse, I think I took some of that on. So negotiation was never a problem for me. And the one thing that my husband, had this really successful sales career, reminds me of all the time is the takeaway close. As a negotiator, and this is especially a good one for women, if it's not working for you and you can't get, I mean, it's one thing to always get what you want in a negotiation. You won't. But if you can't even get close with somebody and you're far apart, you just say, thanks, this has been great. Sorry, it's not going to work out. And you walk away. That's the takeaway close. I have done that so many times in housing negotiations, car negotiations, and 9 times out of 10, not always, right? 9 times out of 10, the person you're negotiating with wants whatever it is bad enough, and they will come after you and you will get closer together. So never forget the leverage, I would just say, in negotiation of the takeaway close. And that applies to salary negotiations too. Gee, really love this company, think I can make a big impact, but we're just so apart on the compensation. I'm going to have to take a pass. Thanks for your time. You'd be stunned at how many times people will go, no, or they'll come back to you.
Love it. Well, Denise, I have to say that my empathy is getting in the way of negotiation. However, I now am capable of thinking, okay, this is a universe telling me something, I've got to walk away. Now, there you go. We have another question from Patrick. How do you invest, Denise? What sort of balance do you tend to give your portfolio with what kind of risk basis? Very interesting and great answers. Thank you. I can see that Patrick wants to invite you. I can see that, Denise. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm interesting. I read a book many years ago called The Black Swan, and it's called The Impact of the Highly Improbable. I read it on a vacation. I was in Maui, and I'm one of those nerds who will take 1,000,000 books on vacation with her. And I was on this great vacation, and my ex-husband I ran out of all my books in week 1, which should have told me something about the marriage. But I said to my ex-husband, do you have any books? He's like, yeah, I brought this one called The Black Swan. And it was literally right about the time that the big 2008 housing bubble was happening. And I'm like, fine, I'll read it. And this book blew my mind. I wish I would have read it, 20 years earlier. And the whole premise in the book, and he's written, the author is Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he's written other books as well, and used to be a Wall Street quant, I believe. And what I love about it is he talks about the importance of, being ready for market dislocations. We've had several of those in my lifetime. I'm 51. I suspect we're going to have a lot more. I keep a lot of cash. Now I look for those instruments that are going to give me, especially right now, a really nice return on my investment. But I like to keep a lot of dry powder so I can invest in things on the fly. I did that during 2008. It was interesting. I was living in Southern California, and I had not lived there for very long. And the housing prices were insane. This is before the bubble. And I refused. I rented a house. I would not buy, $1 million crappy house just because everybody else was doing it. And I just kept banking the money. I was an executive making really good money, kept banking the money. And finally, I read this book. I had all this cash on hand. And then the bubble hits. And there were so many good discounts, right, on literally blue chip stocks that I could go in and invest in. I maintain we're not done with that. I have to say that I look for companies that I think are weak. I look for sectors that I think are weak, and I look just to see, what are the companies that can benefit from that. A sector I think is super weak right now is retail, and you can think I'm crazy. 10 years from now, I don't think brick and mortar retail will exist in the way it exists today. I don't. We've got supply chain dislocation that has never been remedied. We've got people who do not want to work in those environments for a pittance. There's a lot of things happening. And I suspect that 10 years from now, we will be in a largely e-com environment, maybe with some brick and mortar type showrooms. But I think that's going to be a massive dislocation. We've got commercial real estate. So I like to sit on a lot of cash. I do not do a ton of diversification for its own sake. I learned that from the Black Swan, and it's been a really good investment technique for me. me. I really stick to the stuff that I know and understand. I know and understand media. I understand e-commerce. I understand, some of the stuff that's really, really consumer based. And that's the stuff that I tend to gravitate towards in my portfolio.
Now, Denise, I would like to ask you about over-investing, like, being too risky and how to tackle that problem, because quite often we just go and see there is opportunity here, there is opportunity there, and we have FOMO about these great investment opportunities. How to stop that cycle?
Yeah, that's over investing has never been an issue for me. I think with everything, I do believe in some version of diversification. You never want your eggs all in one basket. Probably the best example of over investing is over investing your wealth in your current employer. So what happens is, especially if you work at a big public company, let's say, or any public company, they will pay you sometimes a little bit less. Sometimes they'll pay you a ton just in base salary. I think about a Netflix. Netflix pays insane base salaries, right? Very, very competitive, the most competitive. And then they will also give folks restricted shares, maybe some options, right? There might be a bonus. And what happens is you amass this giant basket of wealth that is all tethered to Netflix. Plus, then your day-to-day base salary is also tethered to Netflix. I personally never wanted to sit on a lot of my company's stock, especially not when I was a CEO, but earlier. Like when I was at HGTV, they were always doing all these programs where they'd be like, come in and buy more stock for this really great price. And I'm like, I don't want any more of your stock, right? I'm waiting all of my time, literally, which is an investment, by the way, in this company. I want to take my cash, make it cash, and diversify a little bit. So I would say I think the biggest overinvestment mistake that people make is betting on one horse, which is the horse of the place where you work. And I don't condone that.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Denise. We have a couple of comments. Olga Vasina says, I think Elon Musk buying Twitter is stupid, lol. There you go. LOL. Now, Patrick says, spot on. Walking away is a vital thing to do when the terms are not where you need them to be to close a deal. And we have some personal notes. Let's go to less personal and let's go into oh my goodness, I lost. Okay, Olga's question. Balance sheets and financials are clearly key, but aren't there big issues for investors with momentum, trends, and so forth, adding complexity and sometimes froth to the whole picture of investing? Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find as an adult who has sort of a clear view now, right? Because I can read financials. I find that Wall Street analysts are very disappointing. I love to listen to them. I love to hear what they have to say. But I think a lot of what happens on Wall Street, a lot of that momentum, to your point, by certain stocks, certain sectors, are a lot like the old Plato's allegory of the cave, right? It's all these guys. I'm sure there are females who are analysts as well, but all these people, they're in the cave, they're getting all lathered, frothed up, right, over a sector, a company. And then when I go and look at, that makes me curious. I go look at that sector, their financials, and I'm like, well, I don't think that's that interesting, right? So I think that the one thing that you have to remember as an investor is, and it's like being a consumer of news, to be honest with you, you have to vet the stuff that you read. Just because CNBC or Bloomberg or any of those folks, Jim Cramer, they're real excited about this stock or that stock, you're going to have to do your due diligence and investigate, because let's face it, everybody's got a motive, right? And everybody is susceptible to buying into the hype on a stock, on a company, on a sector. So, once again, it's that, I hate to keep referring to the Ronald Reagan quote, but it's trust but verify.
We love Ronald Reagan and his quotes, and we're going to go back to that. However, let's go to Olga Vasina. Final question. Are there any real red lines, black marks that you can find on a balance sheet, Denise, that suggests we have a real problem with a company? Let's go more back into the financial and reading the financials.
I get really concerned with a company, and this is something that I feel Wall Street does not ding CEOs for enough. I get very concerned with a company that is only focused on cost cutting. And we see that most of the time now. You rarely see a company that is willing to fail. And a lot of that has to do with how earnings are reported quarterly instead of, other time periods. So they're always feeding that monster that is the quarterly earnings report. And I think that what you see is you don't technically see a lot of top line growth. Some companies you do, but not most. You see a lot of cost cutting. You see a lot of stock buybacks. You see a lot of gaming. And I think for me, coming from more of a marketing brain, I'm looking for the innovation. I'm looking for, the longevity in a business. And I think it's very hard for a business to have longevity if they're not innovating continuously. And cost cutting, I just want to be real clear, it's not strategic and it's not innovating. It's just not. I mean, I feel like I could take any high school student who has 2 brain cells into any corporation in America and be like, start cutting costs, and they could do it. I just don't think, unless we're talking about true optimizing and really getting into, some pretty nitty gritty stuff, most cost cutting is just, hey, you're in marketing, and I know this, I was a marketer, you're in marketing, times are tough, cut 25% from your budget. But there's never necessarily any discussion of how that's going to affect the top line. And quite frankly, most CEOs don't care. So I think that you really, really want to focus on, is the company growing at the top? And is it significant growth? Is it 1%, 2%? Well, that doesn't make me excited. Is it 5, 6, 10? That's amazing. So that's the first thing. I always want to look at the cash flow statement and make sure that they have at least 6 months of operating expenses. And I prefer, frankly, that they have more, especially in an economy like this one. And then again, it's so simple. Do you know how to collect money? Do you have a discipline about collecting the money that is owed to you? And do you have discipline about paying your bills? And if you do, awesome. And if you don't, like I look at somebody like Elon Musk, I would never invest in any of his stuff, right? Or any player who thinks that they're too good to pay their bills. That's just me.
Absolutely. Financial independence is the new sexy, Manisha Thakur says. Let's go back to the literacy. Many females just ignore the fact that we need to know the basics, and we don't have savings, not to mention investing our money. So, Denise, where would you like females to focus if they want to make sure that their future is stable?
I think the easiest way to save is to never touch the money that you designate for saving. I think where a lot of folks, men and women, get into a problem with savings is they will get paid every month. It all gets dumped into their checking account, which is their main checking account. And then it goes into, think about it like a business, that just goes into the common cash flow, right? And then you end up spending it. It's there, you spend it. I think the best way to do that, and you can do this now for decades with direct deposit, which is lovely. You have the ability to say, every single month, I'm going to save 5%, 10%. Set your goal, right? Sit down and look at what you make. Think about it, look at it in a pie chart, get nerdy, and say, I'm going to set aside whatever. Start with 5, whatever it is. And literally then designate from every paycheck that 5% or 15% goes into that savings account. And don't set up an ATM card with the savings account. If you're going to use the savings account, you're going to have to transfer money online or go into a bank, and just really have it there and building and building and building. Especially same thing if you're an entrepreneur, you're an independent contractor, you might even set up a separate account to shave off tax money, right? Because that's going to be a place that you're not even going to see it. It's going to go into that account. You can even do an automated payoff with all the different tax entities. So that's what I would say is don't touch it. Just, make it and dump it. The second thing I'd say is, and I know this from my life, we waste an extraordinary amount of money on things that I don't think really enrich us very much. So I'm very big as an older person into travel and experiences, and I will spend money on that. I used to spend gobs of money on beauty products and La Mer, and I literally had 50 pairs of Christian Louboutin shoes. I sold them so I could start this business on the real. But I just, your values, at least mine have, as I've gotten older, my values have changed, and I don't buy any of that stuff. I don't want it. I don't need it. And there's money in that, right? When I think of all the money I wasted on that crap, I would be an infinitely richer woman if I had not done that.
Absolutely, it's a short pleasure and short-lived, and there are other equivalents, and bootstrapping is key. I totally agree with you. I am managing to manage my finances as well as my mom's, who's right now depending on me. However, there is an element of rewarding yourself at the
Yeah.
end. Let's say there is 5% every month, and I achieved it this month. What would you advise? What to set as a target for each month? No, so it's not that expensive. It's not the La Mer cream, but maybe something that will keep us in positive reinforcement.
I used to actually set aside 10 to 15%. I live on a farm now, so I don't know, I have a really lame life. I don't necessarily spend a ton of money, and it's not hard for me to do it. I think there was more temptation when I lived in a city, but I would say, if you can put it aside 10, 15% in a month for, I used to call it play. That's what I'd call it on the little pie chart, right? And sometimes I'd use it, quite frankly, and sometimes I wouldn't. Like, I was telling someone the other day that I used to, as I said, I used to buy all these really expensive beauty products. And then someone, I think it was TikTok, was like, have you tried these drugstore products? I was like, I haven't, and then you try them and you're like, why have I been spending $300 on face cream? This is the stupidest thing ever. So that's pretty telling of me, I think. But yeah, I agree. You have to have money, especially if I'm eating out would go in that budget for me, sort of that more play money. Eating out for me is very social, it's community, and so you certainly would never want to overlook that in your savings plan.
Well, Denise, I have to say, being raised in the communist Poland, we managed to do some beauty products, like, facial mask with yolk and stuff. And now I just go by some, shelf, and I see something, shiny and whatever, and it really appeals to me. So it's a lot of temptation and a lot of resistance necessary for us to make sure that we are going into a healthy retirement. I mean, what age is a good age to start thinking about saving for retirement?
I always used to encourage my employees when I was a CEO, the younger ones, if you can get into taking that 401k seriously as a minimum, nothing else. But if you can take that money, especially if your employer does the match every year at the companies that I ran, the younger folks, people in their 20s, their 30s, and I understand the reasoning for it. And a lot of circumstances, those people aren't making enough, or they've got incredible student loan debt. It's hard for them to buy a house, especially right now. So I understand why they pass on it. But when you have that company making the match, if your company makes a match on a 401k, definitely take advantage of that for those of you that are here in the US, because it's free money.
Absolutely, it's free money and it's going to get you there. Investing in yourself is the best investment you will ever make. So we are encouraging to purchase Denise's great course on financial literacy. And now let's go to the questions we always ask our lovely guests. So let's start with the book you advise everybody to read, and you wish you read it before you started your career.
The Black Swan, not only for the investing advice in it, but also for the emphasis on the abstract and the counterintuitive. So many of the things that a great CEO needs to know is based on the counterintuitive. It's the stuff that is not on the surface. It's below. It's abstract. I will say 90% of the stuff you're dealing with as a CEO is trying to make something tangible out of something abstract with limited information. And that book really, really got me curious and put me on a path of how to think. I think a little bit more counterintuitively.
Fantastic. Black Swan is definitely a book that Denise is recommending. She mentioned a couple of chapters to us. Now, can you give us your favorite life lesson quote, and how did it change you?
My favorite life lesson quote comes from my father. My father, like I said, was toxically masculine in a lot of ways. He was funny though. He was funny. I loved him. I loved him. But he used to say, never go to the school of good enough. He was a former military guy and, he was really buttoned up like military guys tend to be. And his contention was that so many people are just, they do things half-assed. That's good enough. That's good enough, right? And that was just not what he was about. He was about seeking excellence. And of course, he drilled that into me and my younger brothers. But as I've gotten older, it is something that I've taken on myself. I don't strive for perfection. That's very different. I'm a recovering perfectionist. Perfection is not possible. Excellence actually is possible, though. So I think that there's a saying in the military, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I do believe that, even as simple as I'll go to the grocery store, the people who won't take back their shopping carts, I always think to myself, I would never hire you because you don't care about other people. You're blocking off a parking space potentially. Like there's myriad of things. So I really think never go to the school of good enough.
Absolutely. Even though we quite often like to say the mantra of startups, done is better than perfect, we definitely like you to be ambitious, dear audience. Now, we also want to remind you progress over perfection. Excellence is the game. Now, imagine the pandemic is over. Well, it is pretty much over, but you could travel anywhere in the world and meet with anybody in the world. Who would you like to meet and where would you have that private breakfast?
I want to travel to New York City, which is one of my favorite cities in the world. Although I've been everywhere, I still love New York. And I want to have breakfast with Gloria Steinem. I recently saw her on the new redo of Sex and the City and I'm in awe of her. And I would love to meet up with her there's a quiet little bar in the Peninsula Hotel called Clement. And it is like, it's amazing. It's like an oasis in the middle of the city. Nobody goes there. The only people that go there are weirdos like me who don't want to see other people in this giant city. I would love to talk with her and I would love to hear what her expectations were on sort of the journey for equality and what she's seeing now. And how do you get people to care in a world where there's a lot going on and it's hard for people to care. It seems very hard to get people engaged.
Absolutely. Gloria Steinem is definitely a great activist. She emerged as nationally a recognized leader of second wave feminism in the United States. And just like that, since you mentioned Sex and the City, my favorite series, we are heading towards the end of the show. So, Denise, great answers, great bullet points for any female who wants to join the financial freedom, independence, however you call it. And one thing that really strikes me, Denise, is we are quite often in charge of our households' financials. We have to make sure that kids' schools are paid, and we have to make sure that they are delivered. And somehow we never make it to the top in the C-suite. Now, what would be your advice to these females who are striving for excellency and want to go up the financial ladder?
Look for those gaps and opportunities, number one, and be really brave about identifying them and using your voice. It sounds counterintuitive, but people who speak up, people who have vision, move, they rise, we rise. The second thing I'd say to you is, you hear the term executive presence a lot as a way to kind of take women, other non-traditionally represented folks out of the mix and discourage us from climbing. So if somebody tells you you don't have executive presence, take that feedback. I always tell my clients, you don't have to take all the feedback that people give you. You listen to it and you can discard it or you can take it to heart. But the one thing I want you to think about is, what is your soul's anchor? And so every one of us has something that is special to us and our identity that we refuse to give up. The cool thing about that is the key to your executive presence. So my soul's anchor is speaking truth to power. That was one of my big things in the corporate world. It's a big thing for me now. I speak truth to power. Now, sometimes I had to modify that message so it didn't come off as off-putting, hurt people's feelings. People can be frail and fragile and all that. So I had to tailor that message for influence. But that's the one thing I would say to you is figure out what your soul's anchor is and stick with that as you rise, and find a great coach.
Oh, one of them could be Denise, Queen Maker. Why do you call yourself a Queen Maker?
Plenty of kingmakers in the world. In the history of the world, we hear about these kingmakers, these great men behind great men. We never hear about queen makers, though. We never hear about women who lift other women and help them rise. I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to do that since I'm in the 2% of women globally who have become a CEO. And I'm just here, honestly, to make the journey smoother. I learned a lot, and I didn't have anybody that I could rely on coming up the ladder. I had no mentors who were women. There was no one who'd been, to the road of CEO as I had. So my entire reason for being is to be that, woman behind great women.
Fantastic, Denise. I love the fact that you're supporting other female entrepreneurs and you want to see diversity, just like Cindy Gallop, just like Olga Vasina. Thank you very much for your questions and great comments. And Patrick in IPO Vid, in Patrick's opinion, fantastic show. Thank you, ladies. Really incisive and insightful indeed. Now, Denise, I know something's cooking. You mentioned that the reason being in that hotel is because.
Yes, I am about to publish my first book. It's a workbook. It's called The Blueprint, and it is all about powering up to get to the C-suite. So if you're someone who's an executive or you want to be an executive, this is that Bible, that manual or guide that I didn't have. That's what I'm working on finishing now. I'm 90% finished with it, and I'm headed to New York tomorrow actually to hunker down and finish the last 10%. So that'll be published in the fall.
Well, that's another opportunity. I've got shivers, Denise. Another opportunity for you to be again on our show because we'd love to have that book and also would like to promote that if possible on our channels. And thank you so much for being our lovely guest on this last episode of this part of the year. And thank you for our lovely audience, our production. As always, our positivity quote comes from positive thinking only and goes, look for something positive in each days. Even if some days you have to look a little harder, even if some days you just find a penny, you can make $1. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. As Maya Angelou says, today is your day to hack the future. Hack the positivity you want. Thank you.